Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, George. Thank you, Nicholas, and all the members of the executive. And thank you all for attending this event. I appreciate your generous invitation. It's a genuine pleasure to be here. I was a member of the GSA as an undergraduate at the University of Toronto, and was actually an editor of the student paper that the GSA had at the time, Hijo. Being editor of Hijo allowed me to get to meet and become better acquainted with its former editor, Maria Coromilas, who is now my wife of 15 years. So membership has its privileges, or its benefits, or it can if you play your cards right. Editing the paper also put me in touch with the former Consul General of Greece at the time, Mr. Theodoros Sotiropoulos. This was very important in terms of my intellectual and academic development, as I was offered a small scholarship by Mr. Sotiropoulos to do primary research. There was a catch, though. They got to pick the topic, and the topic that they selected was Canadian-Albanian diplomatic relations during the Cold War. So I set off with my topic, and as it turned out, not surprisingly, there wasn't a single published work on Canadian-Albanian diplomatic relations. So I asked for a little bit more money and went to the National Library and Archives in Ottawa, and they pulled out all of their materials on Albania and Canada, and I learned a lot of things about World War II and relations between Canada and Britain and Albania and Greece to some regard. Was introduced to the issue of Vorioipiro, but there was nothing there really about Canada. And so one of the archivists put me in touch with a historian working at External Affairs at the time, who pulled out all the classified documents, put them in 2 boxes and said, okay, if you get cleared for your security clearance, which you should because you're so young you couldn't have done anything too bad, we'll allow you to sit in this room for as long as you need. You can't photocopy anything, you have to take notes. And through that work came my first published article, because as it turned out, there was a story about Canadian-Albanian diplomatic relations, but it's not the one you would expect. Albania at the time was known as one of the most closed communist regimes in the world, but as it turned out, they were quite keen to forge relations with Canada, right through the Cold War, starting in 1960, right up until relations were established under Prime Minister Mulroney in the mid-80s. But the Canadians, through this 20-plus year period, were quite apprehensive about creating any relationship with Albania. So it was kind of a peculiar story. And it was an interesting process that gave me the opportunity to do work and realize that I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed being in libraries. I enjoyed the detective work of scholarship. I enjoyed sitting in the archives. Has anyone visited the National Archives in Ottawa? It's actually quite a beautiful building. It's overlooks, the reading room overlooks the Ottawa River and the rapids. It's a great, great place, but you're reading, and I like that. So I thought maybe I can do this for a living. And fortunately for me, I did. So my current job is as Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, and downtown, just across the street, at the School of Public Policy and Governance. My principal research, as Kelly mentioned, is in the area of immigration and citizenship policy. And I like to characterize it as membership policy in politics, the politics of membership. What does that mean? It means I'm interested in how immigration and citizenship policies both reflect and help to configure, and at times reconfigure, national identities and understandings of national belonging. They do this by determining who we, as members of a national community, deemed to be worthy of admission into our country? And under what terms? Do we allow people to immigrate, or do we prefer temporary guest workers? That's a choice countries have to make. What rights do immigrants receive upon admission? Are their rights much less and circumscribed as compared to citizens, or relatively similar? And if they have rights on paper, are those rights respected in practice? Are there opportunities for immigrants to attain equality through naturalization and the acquisition of citizenship? Or is citizenship acquisition deterred or made so difficult that it's virtually impossible? And our children, and this is an issue that is particularly of interest to me, are children of immigrants born in a country granted citizenship or given relatively simple access to citizenship, or are they deemed foreigners? And are their children deemed foreigners? So you have a succession of foreigners born, raised, and living in a country. This is what I mean by immigration and citizenship policy determining the boundaries of membership, determining who we are, who we allow to become us, and on what terms. That's what I do. That's what I study. I've explored membership politics and these questions over a long time. As I was writing this, I said over several years, and then I started calculating the years. So I started my PhD in 1995. I think I came up with the topic in 1999, when the year my daughter was born, and it's now 2010. 11. I focused on two countries in particular, Canada and Germany, and to a lesser extent the United States. To date, I've done relatively little work on Greece. I've written some short things and some things on the Greek-Turkish exchange of populations in 1923, but very little on the sorts of things I'll talk about very briefly tonight. But that will hopefully change. This invitation came at a good time. I'm working on a grant application to be able to go to Greece and do some field research there in 2012. So it's on my mind, and I hope I can speak somewhat intelligently about Greece tonight and try to answer some of your questions as best I can. So even though I don't know as much about Greece as I'd like to and as I hope to, I'm not an expert, I do believe strongly, and not only because I have a personal association with the country, but I believe strongly that Greece is a very interesting country for exploring questions relating to membership and belonging. So I'll try to tell you why in the next few minutes. In other words, I'll try to tell you why Greece is a really good case for studying immigration and citizenship and membership. First, it's kind of a natural experiment. So I taught today at Scarborough a course in comparative public policy, and we devoted today's class to research methods and the comparative method specifically. So one method of comparison is called quasi-experiments. In natural sciences, one can do an experiment in the laboratory. So you can carefully control for outcomes, and you can add vinegar to baking powder and create fizz. My children discovered that this is true. They did the experimental method. We had vinegar, we had baking soda, we had a fake volcano. They put it together. Hypothesis confirmed. In social science, it's not so easy, because human beings are not molecules. If we put you in a petri dish and don't feed you, you will grow mold eventually, but there are ethics protocols against this. So what do we do? Quasi-experiments are instances where something happens in a natural environment, in the real world, that is unexpected and different. And we can compare the state of things before the introduction of this new factor and after. So it's not really an experiment, it's a quasi-experiment. And Greece is a laboratory, a kind of quasi-experiment for the effects of immigration.